My name is Hailey. I am 28 years old, and the moment my father slammed his hand on the mahogany table, I knew this dinner was actually a severe courtroom trial designed to break my spirit. The atmosphere in the dining room became suffocating instantly as my parents looked at me with an expression of pure disappointment that they made no effort to hide. My father pointed a shaking finger directly at my face, while his voice boomed across the room with a cruelty that shattered my heart. He shouted loudly, "Hailey, look at your sister to learn how to live, because you are the shame of this family, and I do not understand how I raised such a failure like you." My mother immediately chimed in to support him, while she affectionately stroked my sister's hair, as if she were a precious porcelain doll. She looked at me with cold eyes and added, "Only Jenna makes us proud because she is special, while you are nothing but a redundant shadow living in this house." Jenna just sat there looking at me with a triumphant smile that she didn't even try to conceal from us. I did not cry or beg for their approval this time, because something inside me had finally snapped after years of endurance. I simply looked them in the eye and replied with a calm voice that confused them all. "All right, if you say so." That night, I went back to my room and quietly opened my laptop to prepare the evidence that would destroy their perfect image forever. I printed out exactly 5 desperate text messages begging for money from my sister, alongside 5 bank transfer receipts totaling $150,000, which she never paid back. If you want to see how the greedy pay the price for their betrayal, subscribe to the channel right now to follow this story to the end, because nobody expects what happens next. For the past 3 years, I have accepted living like an invisible ghost inside the cramped and renovated basement of the very house that my salary is secretly paying for. While my parents and Jenna enjoy the spacious marble-floored rooms filled with sunlight upstairs, I exist beneath their feet in a space that smells permanently of damp earth and old pipes. They are completely convinced that I work a low-level administrative job filing paperwork for a logistics company, which justifies my modest wardrobe and lack of expensive jewelry. The irony is that while they mock my supposed poverty, I am actually a senior portfolio manager handling high-stakes investments that generate more revenue in a single trading session than my father brings home in an entire quarter. I deliberately keep my wealth hidden because I know that revealing my true net worth would only turn me into a permanent host for their parasitic lifestyle. Jenna treats my financial stability as her personal safety net, while she spends her days chasing the lifestyle of a socialite she sees on social media. She constantly orders designer handbags or books impulsive vacations that she cannot afford because she knows that our parents will eventually force me to cover the deficit. This toxic dynamic reached its breaking point exactly 2 weeks ago when I was woken up by a frantic pounding on my basement door at 3 in the morning. I found Dad pacing the living room nervously while Jenna sat on the velvet sofa weeping hysterically, with the unmistakable stench of vodka clinging to her clothes. She had taken a turn too fast in a residential neighborhood and smashed her vehicle into a parked luxury sedan owned by a prominent local doctor. Mom did not ask about my finances, but instead commanded me to liquidate my savings immediately because they needed $30,000 in cash by sunrise to settle the matter privately. They were terrified that a police report would ruin Jenna's reputation right before her engagement and destroy the facade of perfection they had carefully built for the community. I sat there with my laptop on my knees, transferring the funds while Dad stood over me checking his watch impatiently as if I were a slow bank teller. When the transaction finally cleared, Jenna did not offer a single word of gratitude or apology for wiping out a significant portion of my hard-earned money. Instead, she wiped her smudged mascara and complained that I should have done it faster because the stress was giving her a terrible migraine. Dad dismissed me back to the basement with a cold remark that it was my duty as the elder sister to protect the family image from scandals caused by youthful mistakes. I walked back down the stairs that night, feeling the weight of their entitlement crushing my chest, because they truly believed my existence served no other purpose than to pay for their sins. They had no idea that the $30,000 was not a gift of love, but the final entry in a ledger that I was preparing to close forever. That fateful Friday evening, the pungent smell of slightly burnt steak filled the dining room, which signaled that an emotional storm was about to break over our family dinner. Jenna tapped her crystal wine glass loudly with a silver fork to demand immediate attention from everyone at the table. Her eyes sparkled even brighter than the diamond ring she was purposefully flashing under the chandelier light. She announced with theatrical excitement that her boyfriend Ethan had finally proposed to her earlier that afternoon. She proudly declared that their engagement party would be held this coming weekend at the exclusive country club, where only the wealthiest families in the state held memberships. My father immediately beamed with pride and leaned back in his chair as if he himself had just won a major lottery jackpot. He looked from Jenna's beaming face to my quiet demeanor and let out a sigh that was clearly meant to be an insult. He pointed his steak knife in my direction and launched into his favorite lecture about success and worthiness. "Hailey, look at that ring on your sister's finger, because you will never see anything like it in your entire miserable life," Dad said with a cruel smirk that twisted his features. "You work yourself to death for pennies and can't even afford the box that ring came in, so you should learn how to live smartly like Jenna instead of wasting your life." I felt a surge of indignation rise in my chest because just 2 weeks ago I had emptied my savings to save his precious daughter from a lawsuit. I tried to speak up about my contributions and remind them that without my financial support, this house would have been foreclosed on months ago. However, my mother cut me off instantly with a wave of her hand, as if swatting away an annoying fly buzzing near her face. "Do not dare to bring up those few pathetic dollars and act like you are some kind of savior to this family." Mom snapped at me with venom dripping from every word she spoke. "When Jenna marries Ethan, she will bring home a fortune that makes your salary look like pocket change, so you would be lucky if she even lets you carry her shoes." I looked at Jenna expecting her to defend me, or at least acknowledge that I was the reason she wasn't facing legal trouble right now. Instead, she just giggled and took a sip of her expensive red wine while looking at me with mock pity. "Come on, Mom. You can't blame her for being jealous because it must be hard watching me get everything she ever dreamed of," Jenna said, with a voice that was sickeningly sweet yet laced with malice. "Not everyone has the natural elegance to be a trophy wife like me, because some people are just destined to be worker bees forever." The table erupted into laughter as if she had just told the funniest joke in the world, while I sat there gripping my napkin until my knuckles turned white. They were celebrating a future wealth that didn't exist yet, while completely spitting on the person who was currently keeping a roof over their heads. I realized in that moment that no amount of money or sacrifice would ever buy their respect, because they were committed to misunderstanding me. The burnt steak suddenly tasted like ash in my mouth as I swallowed the bitter realization that I was utterly alone in this room full of relatives. 2 days after that fateful dinner, I happened to return home earlier than usual because an important client meeting had been canceled at the last minute. I walked quietly through the front door and immediately heard the sound of raucous laughter echoing from the living room, which made me pause in the hallway. Jenna was sitting on the sofa with a glass of champagne in her hand, while chatting animatedly with my best friend's sister Chloe, who was also serving as her maid of honor. They were so engrossed in their conversation that they did not notice my presence behind the decorative partition near the entrance. I intended to walk past them to get to my room, but the mention of my name made me freeze in my tracks instantly. Jenna took a long sip of her drink and leaned closer to Chloe with a conspiratorial look on her face as she lowered her voice slightly. "I simply cannot allow that tacky sister of mine to be in the official family photos with Ethan's parents, because she will ruin the entire aesthetic," Jenna said with a sneer that twisted her beautiful features into something ugly. Just imagine her standing next to me in one of her cheap department store dresses while I am wearing custom silk, because it would honestly make me want to vomit. Nay. Chloe laughed in agreement and nodded her head vigorously while scrolling through something on her phone that I assumed was the guest list. You are totally right, because she always looks like she just rolled out of bed, and honestly, she doesn't fit in with the crowd that Ethan invites. Chloe replied casually, without a hint of guilt. My mother suddenly walked into the room carrying a tray of appetizers and joined the conversation with an eagerness that made my stomach churn violently. She placed the tray down on the coffee table and patted Jenna's hand reassuringly, as if they were discussing a minor household chore instead of excluding a family member. You do not need to worry about her ruining your big moment, because I have already come up with a perfect plan to handle the situation, Mom said with a self-satisfied smile. I will tell her that we are short-staffed in the kitchen and need someone to wash glasses in the back area, so she will be too busy to come out. Jenna clapped her hands together in delight and looked at our mother with genuine admiration for coming up with such a humiliating idea. That is absolutely brilliant, Mom, because she is used to manual labor anyway, so she won't even suspect a thing, Jenna exclaimed happily. Besides, she is only useful as a walking ATM machine for us, so there is no point in letting her stand next to Ethan and lower the value of my party. I stood there in the shadows, feeling a cold numbness spread through my veins as the reality of their betrayal sank in deeper than any knife could cut. I slowly pulled out my phone from my purse and pressed the record button to capture every single word of their cruel plan clearly. They continued to laugh and mock my existence for another 10 minutes, while I stood silently on the other side of the wall, gathering the ammunition I needed. I realized then that they did not just see me as a failure, but as a tool to be used and discarded whenever it suited their selfish needs. The recording saved on my phone was no longer just a defensive measure, but the first weapon in a war they didn't even know they had started. Instead of storming into the living room to scream at them for their heartless betrayal, I quietly stepped back from the partition and walked out of the front door with a terrifying calmness that honestly surprised even myself. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan for several long minutes, while watching the warm glow of the living room windows where my family plotted my humiliation. The tears that I expected to come never arrived, because they had been replaced by a cold and calculating resolve to end this cycle of abuse once and for all. I started the engine and drove away from the house without looking back, because I had a substantial amount of work to do before the sun came up. My first destination was the private branch of my bank, where I requested an emergency meeting with my account representative to access records that went back half a decade. The personal banker looked at me with visible concern as the high-speed printer churned out page after page of undeniable proof regarding my financial enslavement to my ungrateful family. I sat there watching the stack of warm paper grow higher with every passing second, while the ink detailed every bail settlement, credit card payoff, and mortgage transfer I had authorized. Holding that thick stack of documents felt heavier than carrying bricks, because each line item represented a personal sacrifice I had made for people who were currently planning to treat me like a servant. I spent the next 2 hours highlighting specific transactions with a red marker to ensure that even the most oblivious person in the room would understand the narrative. I circled the $30,000 for the car crash alongside the $50,000 I had covered for Jenna's secret gambling debts last year. Once I had my ammunition secured, I realized that I needed to look the part of the executioner rather than the victim they expected me to be. I dialed the number of a high-end fashion consultant named Elena, whom I had met through my investment network, and requested an immediate fitting for a gown that would outshine the bride. I was done hiding in shapeless department store clothes, just to make Jenna feel superior about her own appearance. Elena welcomed me into her private studio and helped me select a custom-designed emerald green silk gown that screamed power, wealth, and elegance. Standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me, because she looked nothing like the walking ATM my sister had described. This woman was a successful portfolio manager who controlled millions of dollars in assets, and she was finally dressing to match her true station in life. My preparation did not stop at clothing and documents, because I needed to control the environment where the revelation would take place. I drove to the country club where the engagement party was scheduled to be held and walked straight into the administrative offices with the confidence of someone who owned a significant percentage of their stock. I walked past the reception desk and went directly to the office of the venue manager, Mark T., who immediately stood up to greet me with the respect due to a silent majority shareholder. He was surprised to see me involved in the logistics of a private event since I usually preferred to remain a silent partner in the club's operations. "Hello, Mark. I need you to help me with a very specific request for Saturday night, because it is crucial that the main projector connects to my personal laptop exactly at 0 hour." I told him with a tone that left no room for negotiation or questions. Mark looked slightly confused by the unusual request, but he nodded his head in agreement because he knew better than to refuse a request from one of the club's most important investors. We spent the next hour going over the audiovisual setup to ensure that my presentation would override any montage my mother had planned for the evening. I wanted to make sure that when I spoke, every single screen in the ballroom would display the truth in high definition, without any technical glitches. As I was leaving the club to return to my basement apartment, my phone buzzed in my pocket with a text message from my mother. She was solidifying the trap they had set for me by confirming the humiliating role they expected me to play. I looked at the screen and read her words, which were dripping with the same entitlement I had heard earlier in the living room. "Remember to come early through the back service door because the head chef is short on kitchen staff, so do not disappoint me," her message read. I stared at the glowing screen without feeling a shred of the guilt that used to manipulate me so easily in the past. I typed out a short reply, agreeing to her demands to ensure that they would remain completely unsuspecting until the very last moment. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and smiled to myself as I merged onto the highway under the city lights. "Do not worry, Mother, because I will arrive exactly on time and I will bring a performance that you will never forget for the rest of your life," I whispered to the empty car. The stage was finally set for a production that would reveal the ugly reality hidden behind our family's perfect facade. I drove home knowing that while they were sleeping peacefully in the beds I was wide awake holding the match that would burn their house of lies to the ground. That evening, the engagement party unfolded amidst the resplendent glow of crystal chandeliers and the melodious strains of a string quartet, creating a perfect atmosphere for the fake people raising their glasses in celebration. The ballroom of the country club was filled with the city's elite, who were busy admiring the floral arrangements while my family played their roles of the perfect aristocracy to absolute perfection. My father stood near the center of the room holding a glass of aged scotch while accepting compliments on his daughter's beauty, and my mother fluttered between groups of guests to ensure everyone noticed the size of Jenna's diamond ring. Jenna herself looked like a princess in her custom-made white gown, basking in the adoration of the crowd, while completely unaware that her reign was about to end abruptly. They were all waiting for the unpresentable sister to be hidden away in the kitchen washing dishes, but I had prepared an entrance that would shatter their expectations completely. As the grandfather clock in the hallway struck the designated hour, I stepped through the grand mahogany doors of the ballroom, wearing the emerald green silk gown that fit my frame like a second skin. The hush that fell over the crowd was immediate and absolute, because I looked nothing like the downtrodden shadow my family had described to their friends for years. I walked through the parted crowd with my head held high, letting the long train of my dress glide over the marble floor with a soft rustling sound that seemed to amplify the sudden silence. My mother dropped the hors d'oeuvre she was holding when she saw me, her eyes bulging with a mixture of confusion and terror, as she realized I had disobeyed her direct orders. Jenna's smile froze into a grotesque mask of panic because she instantly recognized that I was dressed more expensively than anyone else in the entire room, including herself. I did not stop to greet anyone but walked straight toward the elevated stage where the microphone stand was waiting under the spotlight. My father took a step forward as if he intended to physically block my path, but he hesitated when he saw the curious gazes of his business partners fixing on us. He could not cause a scene without destroying the dignity he valued so much, so he was forced to step aside and let me ascend the stairs. I took the microphone from the stand with a steady hand and looked out at the sea of faces, finally locking eyes with my terrified sister. Today is a happy day, and I want to give my sister a special gift, a commemorative video about the true cost to create a perfect Jenna like the one you see today. I announced with a voice that was smooth, calm, and projected clearly to every corner of the silent room. Before anyone could react or applaud, I pressed the remote control in my hand, signaling Mark in the control booth to override the system. The giant projection screen behind me, which was supposed to show a romantic montage of the couple, flickered to life with a stark white background and bold black text that read, "The Jenna Investment Project." A collective gasp rippled through the audience as the first slide appeared, displaying a high-definition screenshot of a text message dated 2 years ago asking for bail money. The image clearly showed Jenna's name and her desperate plea for $30,000 to cover up a drunk driving incident to avoid a criminal record. Next to the text message was a verified bank transfer receipt showing exactly that amount, leaving my personal account and entering hers, a sum that was never returned. The slides began to change automatically, revealing a timeline of financial parasitism that exposed every secret my parents had forced me to keep buried for the sake of their reputation. The screen displayed the $50,000 transfer for her gambling debts, alongside messages where she mocked the very people she was borrowing from. Then, the most damning slide of all appeared, featuring a conversation between Jenna and her best friend Chloe from just last week regarding her fiancé. Ethan, who had been standing near the front of the stage with a confused expression, suddenly stepped closer to the screen as he recognized his own name in the text bubbles. His face turned a shade of crimson that matched the roses on the tables as he read the words Jenna had typed about him being an easy target. He looked from the screen to Jenna with an expression of betrayal that was painful to witness, his voice shaking with suppressed rage as he read the text aloud for everyone to hear. "What is this? Stupid Ethan is easy to trick after the wedding. I will control all the money. Jenna, you need to explain this to me right now." Ethan shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of the humiliation he was feeling in front of his entire social circle. Jenna stood frozen in her white dress, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, because there was no lie clever enough to refute the screenshots looming behind us. I looked at the devastation I had caused, not with regret, but with the satisfaction of a banker finally closing a delinquent account that had been draining resources for too long. I turned back to the microphone one last time to deliver the final statement that would quantify exactly how much their false image had cost me over the years. Total is $150,000 never paid back, and this is the invoice for the classiness she is always so proud of," I said, coldly dropping the microphone onto the stage floor, where it landed with a heavy thud that echoed like a gavel ending a trial. The suffocating silence that had briefly gripped the ballroom was suddenly shattered by a rising wave of whispers that sounded exactly like a swarm of angry bees escaping their hive. The carefully constructed aristocratic facade of the Valenzuela family crumbled instantly as hundreds of eyes turned from admiration to open ridicule and disgust within a matter of seconds. Guests who had been fawning over my mother just minutes ago were now covering their mouths to hide their laughter or pointing their phones at the screen to capture the evidence of our disgrace. The prestigious members of the country club were no longer looking at a respectable family, but were staring at a group of fraudsters who had been exposed in the most public way possible. My mother stood frozen near the buffet table, looking as if she wanted the marble floor to open up and swallow her whole while clutching her pearls in sheer terror. Ethan stared at the text messages looming large behind us with a look of absolute revulsion before slowly pulling the diamond ring off the finger of my sobbing sister. He did not yell or make a scene, but simply tossed the expensive jewelry onto the table where it landed with a harsh clatter that seemed to signal the final death of their relationship. He looked straight into Jenna's tear-stained face and delivered his verdict with a voice cold enough to freeze the champagne in the glasses nearby. I can accept poverty without judgment, but I absolutely detest lies and financial exploitation, so do not ever appear in front of me again, Ethan stated firmly. He turned on his heel and motioned for his parents to follow him out of the venue, without sparing another glance at the woman he had planned to marry just an hour ago. Jenna collapsed onto the floor in a heap of white tulle while screaming Ethan's name in a desperate attempt to stop him from leaving the room. Her cries echoed painfully against the high ceilings, but they only served to make the remaining guests feel more uncomfortable and eager to leave the disaster zone. My parents tried to chase after the wealthy family to explain the situation, but they were met with cold shoulders and security guards who blocked their path to the exit. Realizing that their golden ticket to a life of luxury had just walked out the door forever, my father turned his fury toward the only person left to blame for this catastrophe. He marched up to the edge of the stage with his face turning a dangerous shade of purple and screamed at me with uncontrollable rage while shaking his fist in the air. "What the hell have you done to this family? You just destroyed your sister's future because you are a jealous and miserable wretch." My mother rushed to his side and looked at me with eyes full of hatred as if I were a stranger who had just burned down their home. She tried to grab the hem of my dress to pull me down from the stage, but I stepped back calmly to avoid her desperate claws. I looked down at them from my elevated position without flinching, because his anger no longer held any power over me after tonight. The entire room went quiet again to hear how the daughter they had called a failure would respond to such a violent accusation from her own father. I waited for him to finish catching his breath before I delivered the final blow that would hurt them more than the public humiliation they were currently suffering. I did not destroy anyone's future because I only turned on the lights to show everyone the reality. I replied with a steady voice that carried across the room without needing the microphone. And good luck with this party bill, because the ATM machine named Hailey has officially stopped working from this moment. A gasp went through the crowd as the implication of my words sank in, because everyone knew how expensive a party at this venue truly was. I stepped down from the stage and walked through the parted crowd with a sense of liberation I had never felt before in my entire life. My father shouted threats behind my back, and my sister continued to wail on the floor, but their sounds faded into the background noise of my newfound freedom. I walked past the reception desk where Mark gave me a subtle nod of respect for executing the plan exactly as we had discussed. I pushed open the heavy double doors of the club and stepped out into the cool night air which felt incredibly fresh against my skin. Leaving my family behind in the wreckage of their own making was not an act of cruelty, but a necessary step to reclaim the life they had stolen from me. I walked toward my car, knowing that while their nightmare was just beginning, my life was finally starting for the very first time. 3 months have passed since the chaotic night that shattered my family's facade, and I am currently sitting in my sun-drenched private office looking down at the city skyline. The view from this height is breathtaking, but the true beauty lies in the profound silence that surrounds me now that I am no longer living in a damp basement. The financial tsunami I unleashed that night washed away their delusions of grandeur faster than anyone could have predicted, because they had absolutely no survival skills to fall back on. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on the family estate less than 30 days after I stopped the mortgage payments, which forced my parents to finally face their reality. They watched helplessly as the sheriff placed a padlock on the grand front door of the mansion they loved more than their own daughter. My parents and Jenna are now squeezed into a cramped two-bedroom rental in a dilapidated complex on the edge of town where the heating system rarely works properly. Jenna has been completely ostracized by the elite circle she desperately tried to impress because nobody in this town wants to associate with an exposed fraud. Ethan not only canceled the wedding immediately, but also threatened legal action if she ever tried to contact him or use his prestigious name again. She spends her days trapped in that small apartment because she is too ashamed to show her face in public where people might recognize her from the scandal at the club. The dynamic in their household has devolved into a constant war zone where they scream at each other until their voices give out completely. My father blames Jenna for being greedy while she blames him for not being rich enough to cover her tracks effectively. They are finally living the miserable life they tried to assign to me for so many years, while I continue to thrive in my career. My moment of peace was interrupted when my phone vibrated on the glass desk, displaying a call from a number I did not have saved in my contacts. I answered the call and immediately heard the frantic and sobbing voice of my mother begging me to listen before I hung up. She spoke rapidly about how cold the new apartment was and how they barely had enough food to last through the end of the week. She tried to use her old manipulation tactics by claiming that a good daughter would never let her mother suffer like this, regardless of what happened in the past. I listened to her pleas with a detached curiosity because the emotional cords she was trying to pull had been severed long ago. I did not feel a spark of anger or a wave of pity, but simply the absolute clarity that I was done being their savior. I ended the call without uttering a single syllable to her and immediately blocked the number to ensure my peace remained undisturbed. I took a deep breath and turned my executive chair back toward the window to watch the sunset over a world that finally feels like it belongs to me. This experience taught me that self-respect is a non-negotiable asset that you must protect at all costs, even if it means walking alone for a while. Blood relation is not a valid excuse for abuse, and you have every right to remove toxic people from your life without feeling guilty. The truth is, the most powerful weapon against manipulation and living your life with integrity is the ultimate revenge against those who doubted your worth. Thank you so much for listening to my story and supporting me through this difficult journey of breaking free from a toxic family. I hope this narrative gives you the strength to draw your own boundaries and demand the respect you truly deserve. Please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below to let me know if you think I made the right decision.